Oh, so we'll start. Hi, everyone. And so part 2 on the karma. We might actually finish it in these 4 classes. We'll see anyway. So, unlike when we have the classes in the evening, when we have more time, so this is just an hour and a half, so we won't spend so much time doing meditation, but I think it's very important, especially because it's the first in this series of 4 classes to have, try to make the bodhicitta motivation as strong as possible, as clear as possible, sincere, coming from the heart. So bodhicitta, of course, a mind that, or an attitude, a way of thinking that puts others first, cares more for others than oneself. And really coming mainly from great compassion, which is concerned for all sentients, not just a few friends and relatives, or even your own country, or like everybody on Earth versus everybody else in the universe, or whatever, but all sentients, because they've all been one's mother. So kind. So now, so far, mainly in the in the area of karma, we've gone through the general features of karma, which is that karma is definite and so on. There are those 4 features of karma, general features of karma. And then we've been through the 10 non-virtues. So now what we have got to, in the book, it's page 130, and the heading says differentiating heavy and light karma. So looking at what factors would dictate whether a given karma that you've created, generally speaking, some action that you've done, is that going to be something that was heavy or light? And when you look down a bit, you see that there's this quote from Letter to a Friend. I think that's Nagarjuna. There's one with a similar name, which is not Nagarjuna, but I think this is Nagarjuna. Anyway, it's clear from that we're not just talking about, because you're used to thinking like a certain karma, or it's very, very heavy karma, like that. But and it's like you get the idea it's only destructive karma, like the non-virtues that would be ever described as heavy. But it seems like heavy and light applies to also the more constructive types of karma, which are like the opposite of the 10, such as saving life, protecting life, and so on. So anyway, so looking at those factors which dictate whether an action would have been heavy or light. So it says, this is 2 points: the heaviness of the 10 paths of karma, and an ancillary presentation of ways in which karma is strong. Well, so there straight away, the text is contradicting me. So who's right? I don't know. I guess Lawson covers right. So he says the heaviness of the 10 paths of karma. Well, so mainly the heaviness of the 10 paths of karma. Well, it doesn't say the 10 paths of non-virtuous karma, does it? It just says 10 paths of karma. So actually, you have your 10 paths of karma we've just been looking at, killing and so on. But then there are also the 10 paths of karma, which is the opposite of those. Actually, it sort of can be taken either way. Like when you positively, we'll see this comes up later in the text, when you positively and consciously and purposely make a decision not to kill, like in the case of when you take a vow, though not necessarily involving taking a vow, but you've seen how destructive it is, how much suffering it causes for oneself and others, so you make a positive decision not to kill, then that would be one way of being the opposite of the destructive action or the negative karma of killing. But then also, like, on top of that, not just positively not killing, not just not killing by accident, like when you're asleep, you're not killing, but that doesn't mean to say that you're practicing the virtue of not killing. But so then on top of that, actually saving life, like with stealing, not just not stealing, but practicing generosity, giving to sentient beings and so on. So that's another way of being opposite of the destructive actions, doing the opposite. So anyway, so this has 2 points: the heaviness of the 10 paths of action, and an ancillary presentation of ways in which karma is strong. So that's that's probably going to be next week, or I can't remember now. We might get to it this week. So it says here, levels of yogic practice. Sangyushi, it's the actual basis of the levels. That's the name of the text, and that's the way that it's translated in Geshe Jambakatso's commentary. There is a text, I think, called Levels of Yogic Practice, but this one says Saying Ushi, the actual basis of the levels, and it's by Asanga, great Indian master. So he talks about apparently there of 6 ways in which an action can be heavy. So you've got conditioning. I don't really know the significance of this word, conditioning, conditioning. But anyway, the meaning is pretty straightforward. So, except that there's one thing to talk about here, I'm not sure about. It says, this is the strong presence or absence of the 3 poisons that motivate the action. So if this was just about destructive karma, what makes destructive karma heavy or light, then that would kind of make sense, because it talks about having the 3 the 3 poisonous minds being present in a strong way, or not being present. You could understand it in that way. You could sort of translate it that way. But normally, when I look at that phrase, in the original, when we talk about, for example, attachment, so the 3 poisons that it's talking about here would be attachment, anger, and ignorance, right? Attachment, anger, and ignorance. So, so that would be like, say, dojak is attachment. Dojak meba, non-attachment. It could be absence of attachment, but normally in these texts, it's going to be more like non-attachment, where non-attachment is something which is the opposite of attachment, opposite in the sense of being the the antidote, the force that counteracts it. So I mean, like, so in general, like when we talk about renunciation, that would be the opposite. That would be non-attachment. So also, like, so non-anger. Non-anger wouldn't just mean an absence of anger, like you're just not angry. Maybe you're doing something, maybe attachment is arising, so you're not angry. I mean, there's nothing so particularly positive about that, is there? But non-anger would be, I don't know, like patience, or actually in the karma abiding section, it talks about meditating on loving kindness as an antidote to anger. So anyway, you get the idea. It's not just an absence of, it's the very opposite, the antithesis of it. So so in other words, if the motive, if your frame of mind when you're doing the action of killing is includes, because there are these 3 factors that it talks about in terms of the attitude for killing, and in fact, obviously all 10 of those non-virtues. So one of them is the mental affliction, right? So if it's very strong, good. If it's very strong attachment, then it's going to be a heavier kind of killing. Or let's say it's more easy to imagine very, very strong anger, killing out of very, very strong anger, or not so strong, or something in between. You can imagine where it would be very strong, even in the case of like a mosquito, right? So the mosquito is landed on you, and it's actually started stinging you, and you can get really annoyed with a mosquito so you just splat it, you just annoy it, so you splat it, like, so relatively angry, right? I mean, maybe you're not kind of like livid, but you're angry with it. But then another thing that can happen is that you see it's land and you just brush it off, and you don't really care about just brushing it off so that it doesn't get hurt, but you brush it off. You don't, you want to kill it, but just a little bit less, you get the point. Anyway, you can do something out of very, very strong anger where you actually, you're they talk about seeing red, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody here has really got angry where your vision actually changes. Things look different. Just like when, like if sometimes when desire arises, then things look a little bit rosy. So also sometimes when you get angry, there are things, I don't know about red. They talk about seeing red. I don't know if I've ever seen red, but I can remember getting angry, and it's like there's something, the actual, your perception actually becomes quite harsh. Things have this kind of harsh appearance. So why am I saying that? Yeah, so that's when it's quite strong. That's when it's quite strong. And then it also can be just a little bit of irritation and then something in between. So you can see there are different levels. And what they usually say is that if it's done with very strong anger, then in terms of the ripening result, which means what kind of life it can propel you towards, then they say hell realms. If it's middling, preta. If it's quite light, animal. So that's one of the things that's significant about that. And in the same way, the non-attachment could be very strong, the counterforce of attachment or the counterforce of anger, and it could be very strong, or it can be middling, or it can be quite weak. So it's the same kind of thing. Anyway, I think that's enough. You get the idea. Then habituation. So this is having engaged in virtuous. You see, it actually mentions virtuous or non-virtuous actions for a long time, such that one has become accustomed to them through repetition. So basically, that action, when it's something that you've been doing for a long time, you kind of like been always doing it, it's built up into a really strong habit, then that makes it much more, that's one factor that makes it much more powerful. Then the nature. So this is quite interesting, actually. So in the case of the 7 actions of body and speech, so each preceding one is heavier than the subsequent one. So in other words, if we stick to the non-virtues, killing is heavier than stealing. Stealing is heavier than sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct, generally, okay. Because I want to maybe bring up one point here. So the sexual misconduct heavier than lying, then devised speech, harsh speech, and the idle gossip. It doesn't mean categorically that the killing has to be heavier than the stealing. So because I suddenly thought to myself, stealing is heavier than sexual misconduct. You see, if the sexual misconduct is, there are certain types of sexual misconduct which don't seem to be particularly heavy. I'm not going to say that they're okay, but relatively, it's just. But certain types of sexual misconduct could be very, really terrible, can't they? And then it's almost like, you must be kidding. That's much worse than stealing. You can steal $1 million. You can. It'll be nothing compared with this act of sexual misconduct. So you have to. It's just generally generally speaking, all things being equal, as they say. That's the order of heaviness. And then when you get to 3 of the mind, then the covetousness is the one that's least strong. Then stronger than that is the ill will, which kind of makes sense. And then the wrong view. Probably the wrong view is the heaviest because it can lead to so many other things. Like, when you have the wrong view, thinking that there's no future lives, karma doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want, then, so how's that going to affect how you live your life? That could be the basis for you to do all of the other 10 all of the time, couldn't it? Okay, so that's the nature. So still a few more to go. The basis. So this is talking about the basis in the sense of like the object of the action. So what, as it says, basis, that this is what is benefited or harmed. depending on whether it's a constructive action, helping, or a destructive one where you're harming, such as the Buddha, the Dharma, Sangha, and one's gurus. I mean, for sure, no question, if Lama Zopa Rinpoche were teaching this, then, you know, of course, the gurus would be the heaviest and the most important one. No question. And that's not just like his way of seeing things, of course. Like, for example, in Ishisunru's nectar essence, I think it's called, something like that. Essence of nectar, nectar essence. Trying to remember, there's a book. Oh, I forget. I think, anyway, I think that there's a book from Wisdom Publications which has that plus a commentary, maybe by Geshe Rabten, and that's where I might be getting this completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's where you have the a book that Lama Zopa often used to recommend, because it gives you some idea of how to structure a year, a year, so that you cover the whole of the stages of the path in 1 year, and also how you can do it in 1 month. I think it's that one. But anyway, there's a verse which Lama Zopa used to quote very often, where it talks about, if you because the Buddha is like the guru is, at the very least, is like the representative of all enlightened beings, then like mocking the guru is like mocking all of the Buddhas. And in fact, if you think about it, it's even worse. But anyway, that kind of thing. So, much, much heavier. Yeah. So then the fifth one, singularly adhering to the discordant side. So this is, so that must be how it's mentioned in that book by Sangha, and Lama Tsongkhapa explains its meaning. This is spending one's whole life committing non-virtues actions with singular conviction and not engaging in even one virtue. Seems quite similar to the second one, habituation. But here it's obviously just this is more with on the destructive side, right? Singularly adhering to the discordant time. So this is spending one's whole life. So as long as you're alive, all the time you're alive, you're doing this kind of negative action and never doing anything worthwhile, anything really positive. So in that context, when you do a particular destructive action, it becomes much heavier. Then clearing away the discordant side. So this is giving up the side of non-virtue, becoming free from attachment, and training in virtuous actions. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of food for thought here, but it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? I think. I guess with that sixth one, it's like, generally speaking, you've set yourself this project of avoiding all of these destructive actions, becoming free of attachment, and trying to put all of your energy into things that are worthwhile and helpful, constructive. Then letter to a friend. Yeah, this is what I was saying. I think it's Nagarjuna, but now I can't. I'm not 100% sure. I just assumed it was, but it probably is. There's no one with a similar title. What is that? Maybe Chandra Gomin. Anyway, so in that it says there are 5 ways that non-virtuous and virtuous karmas become great. So this is, he says great, but it's the same as saying heavy, So persistence. So that would match up with well, you can look at it yourself maybe, but you can persistence is like doing it all the time. Then strong adherence. So that would be like the habituation, I should think. Right, habituation may be equivalent to. Then strong adherence. So ngomba shimba. This would be the same as the conditioning, where it talks about the three poisons or the opposites of the three poisons. Ngomba shimba. Well, ngomba shimba. So that would mean like the three poisonous minds, but it would also imply the opposite of those. You can understand the opposite would be applicable also. Then no antidote. So this is not particularly mentioned in that list from the levels of yogic practices he's translated it. So for this one, there's this expression, so no antidote. So in other words, what it's saying is when you do the action and you don't apply the antidote, it becomes heavier. Now, why is that? How does that work? I mean, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure, but there's this saying that you might have heard before, which is that it goes something like, for the wise, the heavy becomes light, and for the fool, the light becomes heavy. Light action becomes heavy. So for the wise person, the heavy becomes light means the wise person knows how to purify, can understand the difference between what's right and wrong, so that but then when they do, so that would help them to avoid doing anything wrong. But even suppose they do, which can happen, like even in our case, we know that in general the difference between right and wrong, but we still do things that are wrong, sometimes even knowingly. You're doing it and you shouldn't be doing it. You feel like I shouldn't be doing this, which also helps actually, because in a way you'd think it would be worse maybe, but you're doing it and it's like you're doing it with a sense of regret, like somehow you know that you've lost control and you have this feeling of regret as you're doing it, reluctance, regret, that kind of thing. So then having done it, knowing how to purify, knowing the importance of purification, knowing the importance of purifying as soon as possible makes a huge difference. I don't know if this is applicable to every kind of destructive action, but sometimes with the vows, I think particularly with the tantric vows, specifically in the case of the tantric vows, His Holiness mentioning that when you purify within 4 hours, then it makes the action much lighter. And actually, I think that would mean that you'd have much better chance of completely purifying it after that time. Then it becomes heavier and more difficult to purify. Not impossible to purify, but just more difficult. So you get the idea anyway. So for the wise person who knows there are differences between right and wrong, and knows how to purify, and is serious about their practice, so they're not going to just let it slide. They're going to, purify straight away. They say that Lama Atisha, the great Lama that came to India. No, it came from India to Tibet in the second sort of promulgation of the Buddhist teachings in Tibet. That like if he was traveling somewhere and he broke one of his vows, probably one of the minor ones only, then he would immediately stop and purify it straight away. Yeah. So and then for the fool, or anyway, so somebody who's not wise, then the light becomes heavy, because maybe they don't even know that what they did was wrong. Maybe they know that they did what they did was wrong, but don't know about how to purify. They don't purify. They don't have the feeling of regret, which is one of the most powerful and most important things about purifying, is to have regret, sense of regret. Then what they say is, you see, when you've done, if you, let's say, you know, I can't remember exactly how this goes, but like, for example, suppose you've killed a mosquito and you don't purify it. So after one day when you've left it without purifying, you've sort of got this destructive force of having killed the mosquito in the first place, and then also another destructive force from not having purified. Then the next day, if you still haven't purified that, then there's the original two plus the sort of the destructive force that's built up from not purifying those two. So it becomes 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. And well, I mean, you know, like the thing about the chessboard, you know, 1 grain on the first square of the chessboard, and then the next one 2, and then 4, and then eventually fills up the whole kind of, like, I don't know, how much would it become after you get to the end of the chessboard? I don't know, but you know what I mean. Keeps doubling, doubling, doubling. They say after a while, after, I don't know, certain number of days, actually, it becomes equivalent to having killed a human being. Yeah, so that's what it means about when it says no antidote. Yeah, and I don't know why, but I'll mention, just because it's often the analogy is given at this point quite often, that it's just like a steel ball. Even if it's a small one, when you put it on the water, it'll sink straight away. So that would be like, for the fool, the light is heavy. Whereas if it's flattened out into a bowl, it could even be a much bigger piece of metal, but it's flattened out into a bowl, it'll remain on the surface. So like that. Okay, so then that's the no antidote, and a basis with foremost qualities and of primary importance. So these two are to do with the basis. So up there, it just said, what did it say? It said Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Gurus. It didn't mention parents, but here, the basis with foremost qualities would be where the object is, like the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, or you know, the gurus. And then of primary importance would be not sort of like holy objects, but primary importance that anyway it refers to your parents. Okay, so if those are the object, then the action, even if it's something quite that looks quite insignificant in the positive side, on the positive side, or on the negative side, it becomes very powerful. The parents, you know, like as we'll see later on, the parents are the example that's given for karma, whose result is experienced in the very lifetime that it's been created. The ripening result comes in the very lifetime when the action has been done. Would be like, you know, if you've well, basically, if you're good with your parents in the earlier part of your life, then you experience the result of that in the later part of your life. That kind of thing. And also the opposite, if you do bad things with your parents. Okay, so that's that one. Among these, strive to practice virtue. So given that is the case, make very sure to practice virtue, he says. So Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that is, there are 5. So persistence, number 1, strong adherence, number 2, no antidote, number 3, a basis with foremost qualities, number 4, importance would be number 5. It becomes 5 because the basis has been split up into 2. The ones with foremost qualities, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Guru, and primary importance, parents. So it's 5 because of the division of the basis into 2, a basis endowed with foremost qualities such as 3 chores, and a basis of great benefit such as one's parents. Okay. Should we keep going? Keep going. Okay. So then an ancillary presentation, of ways in which karma is strong. Sounds the same, doesn't it? Before's heavy and light, now it's strong. Okay, but let's see. It's similar, actually. It is a similar kind of idea. And in fact, what did it say? Differentiating heavy and light karma had 2 points, the heaviness of the 10 paths of action. So that was mainly about the 10. Then an ancillary presentation of ways in which karma is strong. So this has 4 points. So you've got the great strength by way of the field, which is the same as the basis, actually. They were calling it above, the field, the object. Great strength by way of the support. That's more to do with yourself, whether you've got vows or not. Great strength by way of the thing, the actual action itself. And then great strength by way of the attitude. So we know about that from going through the 10 non-virtues. So by way of the field, in the case of the 3 jewels, gurus, those who are like gurus. I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to mean. Those who are like gurus. I'm not sure what that means. One's parents and so forth, even if one's attitude towards them lacks intensity and the benefit or harm one does to them is small, any merit or misdeed will be great. Okay, so that's a fairly simple idea, isn't it? The application of Mindfulness Sutra. So it says Smityupasthana Sutra. Oh no, Trimbanyesha. Satipatthana, I thought it was called, but that would be probably the Pali name. Anyway, there's Mindfulness Sutra. So it says the calm of stealing. So this is actually quite I don't know. So yeah, anyway, it makes some quite important points here, and some which might be a bit surprising if you haven't come across them before. The karma of stealing even a little thing from the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, is purified if it is returned in the case of the Buddha and the Dharma. So, in other words, it purifies or helps to purify. If you've stolen something from that was offered to the Buddha or to the Dharma, you can purify it by giving it back to the Buddha and the Dharma. Yeah. In our days, in our time, I mean, of course, that would have to be things like statues, wouldn't it? You know, and texts, offerings that would be made in front of statues and texts. However, in the case of the Sangha, it is not purified as long as the result is not experienced. So it's basically saying you can't purify it. Now, I do want to say this, the application of Mindfulness Sutra, from my recollection, according to my understanding, is a Hinayana Sutra. And there are some things in the Hinayana Sutras that are described as not being possible to purify. And what it seems to come down to is not possible to purify means in the Hinayana teachings, there aren't methods for purifying them. Whereas in the Mahayana, they're not considered to be actions that can't be purified because there are much more powerful purification methods, like with Vajrasattva, meditating on bodhicitta. You don't have bodhicitta in the Hinayana. So that kind of thing, you know, there's that kind of thing. So, but still, it does give you a sense. Now I've just completely lost the page. So you put your finger on the screen and suddenly it's gone. It doesn't have a little thing that you can press to make it go back again. Okay, so I've gone back to page 28. Where were we?
Page 132.
Thank you. You just made me jump.
Sorry.
132. Okay, that'll be easy to find. Thank you. 32. Okay. So what I was saying is it does give you an idea, nevertheless, of the seriousness of it. Okay. However, in the case of the Sangha, it is not purified as long as the result is not experienced. And Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't explain it here, but I have heard the reason. This is something that I seem to remember having come across in the 35 Buddhas, the prostrations, 35 Buddhas. So there, what does it say in Gendungi Krom? Because the Chodungi Krom, Gendungi Krom, Chochu Gendungi Krom Tropadam. So it talks about possessions of the Sangha, and then also the possessions of the Sangha of the 10 directions. Oh, what happened there? Brian Charlie went and came back again. Okay. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, so how I remember it is the point, the way that the reasoning behind this is that if it's a question of giving back what you've taken, if you've offered to the Sangha, I mean, there's even these days, and maybe even more so at the time of the Buddha, it's like next day, that Sangha could be anywhere. You're just never going to be able to track them down. So how are you going to ever be able to put it right by giving it back to them? So it's just like it becomes impossible. So in other words, because you can't do that, you're not going to be able to purify it by giving back to them. That's the thinking behind it. So anyway, it does give you a sense of, wow, this is really serious. I mean, just because it's Hinayana teaching doesn't mean to say that every aspect of it is going to be wrong. Of course, right? I mean, that would be ridiculous. That's a ridiculous idea. Anyway, so you get the point. So it makes it more difficult to purify because of not having that possibility very easily of putting things right by, going up to them and saying, look, I took this, so please, I want to hand it back again. Okay. Then it is not purified as long as the result is not experienced. In other words, to purify it means to do something that means that you won't have to experience the ripening result, which is like the main suffering effect. Very often the ripening result does refer to like a birth in one of the lower realms, but it can also mean the ripening result can also be just something unpleasant happening to you, whether it's in this life or some future life. Okay, so then he says, if it is a requisite means of providing sustenance for the Sangha, so this seems from just looking up this term and looking at the commentaries and looking at the Lamrim Chenmo, the great exposition of the Station Path, it seems to come down to basically the food and drink, which belongs to the Sangha, which is provide sustenance, food for them to eat and drink and so on. So if it's that, then you'll be born in the great hells. So it's funny, when you go through the 8 types of hells, none of them is called the great hells. And if something else, then one will be born in the great darkness surrounding the Avicii. So the Avicii is the 8th lower, the lowest level of the hell realms. So darkness, I don't know. Also, when we were going through the hell realms, it didn't mention like one of the surrounding hells being called great darkness or something. But anyway, so that's what it says. Anyway, it does sound like not very nice. Okay, so not very nice. So need to purify that. So you see, anyway, I mean, who knows how much of this we've done in past lives, right? Even if you haven't done it this life. But also, if you keep going down, then it shows you have to be so careful. And in case I forget, actually, I just want to mention, I remember hearing of something about Lama Lundrup, which some of you might have met. If you haven't met, then you probably heard of. Anyway, so he passed away a few years ago, and for many years he was the abbot of Kopan Monastery. And so what I heard was that one time so there was a sort of, at Koban in the old days, there was a kind of, Western Sangha community. So it's like they had their own accommodation and kitchen and their own, like possessions and so on. So he just went to visit one time, and somebody offered him a cup of tea, and he wouldn't take it because he wasn't sure whether this person had the right to give him that tea. And maybe this is the kind of reason, it's like, so if somebody gives me a cup of tea that hasn't got which means giving me the possessions of the Sangha that hasn't got the right to, is a bit like stealing. And then you're kind of like, you at least you become part of that. So, who wants to do that? Because then, how do you purify it? It's not easy to purify. Anyway, you'd have something to purify. And who wants to have to, better to not do the things that need purification than to do them and then have to purify them and hope that you purified well enough. You see what I mean? So I thought, that's always stuck in my mind, that story, be so careful with the Sangha possessions. I mean, I have some doubts in my own mind about where that leaves us in relation to the possessions of a Dharma center, especially if it's a Dharma center that belongs to your guru. But anyway, I never got around to asking about that. But it's pretty obvious. You'd also have to be very careful. You'd also have to be very careful, right? I mean, it's bad enough taking what's not given anyway, but taking what's not given from a Dharma center or from a monastery, you can imagine, right? So then, so then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say, and that some of this is, it's in a way it's the same kind of theme. But anyway, so we're talking about great strength by way of the field, the object, right? Bodhisattvas are an extremely powerful field of virtue and non-virtue. So now you're going to get some of these amazing explanations of, just really what that means. So there's a sutra, which is a very long title. Anyway, Shraddha Balathanavatara Mudra Sutra, the seal enhancing the power of faith sutra. So this says that compared to someone who out of anger puts all the sentient beings of the 10 directions into a dark prison, if someone else out of anger turns his back on the bodhisattva, saying, I will not look upon this horrible person again, that person generates much worse karma than the first one. Much worse. We could talk about this, but if you think about it, I think it would be nice if you think about this and try to understand, why would that be? And I think it's, just to maybe give a hint, I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that here, in the case of Bodhisattva, we're talking about somebody who has bodhicitta. This is somebody who is, focused on, intent on achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And somehow what they're trying to achieve for the sake of all sentient beings, what they're striving to bring to all sentient beings is just, it's somehow, it would make the putting all the sentient beings into a dark prison nothing in comparison. If put in prison, they're not going to be there forever. But here, this is the Bodhisattva is striving for, lasting, really enduring. And enduring means like going on forever. Happiness that's pure, uncontaminated, going on forever, right? So something like that, I think. Anyway, that's my opinion. You might have to different interpretation. Also, compared to someone who has destroyed and burned down stupas as numerous as the sand grains of the Ganges River. So how many do you think that is? I'm trying to remember, actually, because in the Mahayana sutras, when it says Lama Zopa said this several times in the Mahayana teachings, when it talks about sand grains of the Ganges, you have to understand it as actually meaning the molecules of water in the Pacific Ocean. And I think some years ago, one person we were probably going through the same text just many years ago, worked out how many molecules of water there were in the Pacific Ocean. I guess there's a way of calculating how many gallons there are, and if you know how many gallons or how many liters there are, then you could probably work out how many molecules of water there are in a liter and just multiply it. So anyway, a lot. But for the sands of grace in the Ganges, after I'd read this book, quite an interesting book really, which anyway, I can't remember the name of it now, but so around the time that we came across this idea of the sand grains of the Ganges River, just to give an idea, tried to work out how many sand grains in a handful. If you take a handful of sand now, how would you do that? So how we did it, I was doing it with one friend. How we did was, so take a handful, and then it's like a ballpark kind of like. So what you do is you take a handful and then you divide that up into two, and divide that into two. You have to keep track of how many times you divide it up into two, right? And you keep dividing up until you get to just a little bit on the palm of your hand, and you just about count it. Maybe you can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe up to 200. Then you multiply it by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, and then that's how you know how many grains of sand there are in one handful, right? And then it's like, I don't know if it really helps, but because of course we don't know how many handfuls of sand there are in the river Ganges, but it sort of gives you an idea. If there's that many in one handful, wow. The river Ganges in general. So anyway, I don't know. Also, compared to someone who has destroyed and burned down stupas as numerous as the sand grains of the Ganges River, and like for us, even the idea of destroying one stupa is like, my goodness, just it's unthinkable. Anyway, that many. If someone else, so in comparison with that, someone else generates anger and a harmful intent in their mind towards a bodhisattva and says unpleasant things to them, it's as above. In other words, it's just that's the first one is nothing in comparison to this. Then the seal of engaging in certain and uncertain destiny sutra, the Niyata Mutra Vatara Sutra, says that compared to someone who, out of loving kindness, restores the eyes of those sentient beings in the text in the 10 directions. So all the sentient beings of the 10 directions, they've had their eyes gouged out. I don't know who did that, but anyway, they've had their eyes gouged out. And now, so somebody comes along and restores their eyes. I mean, just doing that for one person would be amazing, wouldn't it? Right? Okay, so all those sentient beings then, and who, after releasing the aforementioned sentient beings from prison, so somebody put all the sentient beings in prison. So now you're going to go along and release them all. So that's why it's not so bad, because somebody's going to come along and release them afterwards. Then establishes them in the happiness of a universal monarch. So a universal monarch, anyways. So that's one that's like the emperor over not just this whole world, but anyway, I know it's a bit difficult to really know how to say, isn't it? But according to the tradition or classical way, then you've got this world, but then there's 3 other worlds, and then there's the Mount Meru in the middle, and it's all, of course, it's just a fairy tale, but just to give you an idea anyway. Maybe a bit like Baron Harkonnen in Dune, right? But not like Baron Harkonnen in Dune, right? Baron Harkonnen in Dune, he was a bit like the wheel-turning king, but he was a baddie, right? He was really quite nasty piece of work, with all due respect. So the Chakravartin kings, it seems like pretty amazing, from what you understand, because you have all that power, but also you use that power for good. It's like you introduce laws and legislation, and that helps everybody, that makes everybody. It's just unbelievable. If we only had that, wow! Just imagine in this world if you had somebody who was the ruler of the world. There's a song, isn't there? Doppel in the Fiddler on the Roof. If I ruled the world, isn't it? Isn't it from there? If I ruled the world, isn't it in the Fiddler on the Roof? I can't remember. I can't remember.
If I was a rich man, if I was a rich.
So who is it that did it? If I ruled the world, then I can't remember. Was that But anyway, what I can't remember is what comes afterwards. I can't remember what this guy was going to do if he ruled the world. So anyway, just imagine if you had somebody ruling the world. Like Lama Zopa used to talk about making prayers for like all of the rulers in the world to suddenly have faith in His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And can you imagine faith and then following His Holiness's wishes? Just imagine that. All the rulers, and I think it's nice to sort of expand on that a bit, like all the rulers, everybody in key positions of power, anybody in a position of power has bodhicitta. And so they use their power for doing good things for society. Can you just imagine? That's the kind of thing that's possible, actually, isn't it? Maybe there are worlds in other universes where that's happening, maybe it would be nice, wouldn't it? Anyway, so establishes them in the happiness of a universal monarch or of Brahma. So Brahma is the king of the gods, they usually say, I think. Maybe even more powerful in that case. If someone else, so this is really amazing, because that's just amazing already, isn't it? You can kind of imagine it. It's a little bit unimaginable, but you can kind of imagine it. So all of their eyes have been gouged out, and you restore their sight. All those sentient beings in prison, you freed them from prison. Not only that, but each and every one of them you've established in the happiness of a universal monarch. Then in comparison with that, someone else out of trust looks at, or out of faith wishes to look at, a bodhisattva endowed with the Mahayana aspiration and sings his praises, in other words, praises the qualities. That person generates incalculably greater merit. So, it really, this is all about how powerful an object a bodhisattva is, right? Also, the magic of the complete certainty of total peace sutra. So we got half an hour left, right? Okay, that's good. Also, the magic of the complete certainty of total peace sutra. Prashanta Vinishkaya Pratihariya Sutra says that compared to killing all the sentient beings of Jambudvipa, so this world, the world that we live in, or seizing all their possessions, someone who obstructs even as little as the virtue of a bodhisattva's giving a handful of food to an animal generates incalculably. It's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Incalculably greater evil. Therefore, you should be very careful with respect to these objects. So now, how are you going to be careful with them? First of all, you have to know who they are. How do you know who they are? Don't know who they are, right? We don't know. So we have to be careful with everybody. There's a big thing. That's a really big thing, isn't it? It's a sort of, that's something to kind of remind yourself of every day. Really don't know who is a bodhisattva and who is not. Because bodhisattvas are not necessarily the they're not necessarily going to be all sort of like, what do you call it, fluffy bunnies or whatever it is they say, it's not, they're not, you didn't hear? Did you hear what I said? Yeah, okay. Fluffy bunnies. Anyway, they're not all, I don't know, from my understanding, and I think from, if you think about, I don't know, like people like His Holiness and other gurus of ours in the world, they're not always all the time all sort of like just nice, because they can, in other words, they can be quite tough. I don't know. Then there are stories of there's a story of, I mean, like, there's who is it, Luipa, I think, Naropa Luipa, I think, maybe Naropa Tilopa Luipa. I think Luipa is the name, has something to do with the fish. And if I'm not getting my names mixed up, but anyway, so maybe, so if it's Tilopa, so Tilopa's guru Luipa, so searching for Luipa, and then I think maybe he's the one. It's like he's been told he should look for Luipa. I might be getting my people mixed up completely, I don't know, but he's been told by somebody he should go looking for his guru, Luipa. In other words, like, this is your guru. I mean, he's never met him before, but this is your guru. And so he goes looking for him, and he kind of gets to the right area. He's asking around for, the great master Luipa, and nobody knows who he's talking about. But at a certain point, somebody says, "Oh yeah, there's this guy over there. They call him Luipa or something like that. And maybe go and see him." Nobody has any kind of idea at all what he is. This great master, and he finds him catching fish and throwing them in the fire and eating them. And it's like, this can't be my guru. But then Luipa is aware of what's going on in his mind, and he just kind of like snorts, kind of thing, and then he does something that shows that actually what he's been doing is he's been catching these fish and sending them to Pure Lands, So you can't tell. You really can't tell. I know there are some other stories and I can't really remember, but anyway, yeah. Yeah, there's a story of a butcher in Lhasa, maybe not in recent times. I don't know how long ago it was, but anyway, so I mean, a butcher, like in the real sense, would butcher the animals. But actually, this was a bodhisattva who was, sending their consciousnesses to Pure Lands first. So anyway, yeah, they always say that in the monasteries, and this is just an example. I mean, because when you're talking with when the teachers of the monks are talking to the monks, then they're talking about the monasteries, so talking about how, it's like guaranteed that in a monastery there's going to be some bodhisattvas, but you wouldn't be able to tell who's a bodhisattva and who's not. Just like, you hear these stories of certain monks who are, I think recently I was told about this. There's one old monk in the monastery, it's quite recent times, maybe in the last few decades, who it was kind of like the younger monks would make fun of him, and he was known as being a little bit eccentric and maybe not all there. But one day he goes around giving that's right, he puts all of his clothes and possessions outside on the street and says, anybody who wants them can take them, or I think he might have even been selling them so he get the money to use for offerings. And then the next day they find him, like this, he's died, he's passed away. he knew he was going to pass away, or maybe he decided to pass away, and so he was in that, the laying down like the Buddha. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. I mean, also there's a story of Shantideva, isn't there? I mean, he got practically thrown out of the monastery because he just did nothing. And what was it? They called him the pusuku, the three perceptions is what they call it. So eating, sleeping, going to the toilet. That's all he did. Never did anything. So then they wanted to make fun of him. They wanted to bring him down by making him come in front of the monastery and take his turn to teach the monks. And yeah, that's quite amazing. So anyway, they brought him in, and so he sits down and he says, "So do you want me to recite something that's something new that you never heard before, or some scripture, some sutra kind of thing?" So I said, something new. So he recited the Buddhacharavatar that he'd composed. And during the 9th chapter, he starts floating upwards into space and disappears, never comes back to Nalanda. Yeah. So you just can't tell. You can't tell who is what, can you? Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, so you have to be very careful. They say it's like a bodhisattva is like hot coals covered with ashes, so you can't see the hot coals, but if you tread on them, you get burnt. So just like that, bodhisattva, you can't tell who's a bodhisattva, who's not a bodhisattva. Just like they talk about misleading friends. You can't tell who's a misleading friend. They can they don't have horns growing out of their heads. They might be the most friendly person who like really seems to care for you and doesn't like the fact that you want to spend all your time indoors meditating and stuff, so they want to take you to go to the bar, go to the movies and so on, which can be nice sometimes, I'm sure. But anyway, the point is you can't tell. The one who's leading you astray could be the most friendly person, and the person who's so always kind of like grumpy and so on, that could be the bodhisattva. You can't tell. Not very easy to tell at all. We can't tell anyway. So then, oh gosh, I have to hurry up. I want to get down to the bottom of this bit. So then, the great strength by way of the support. No, we've done that, haven't we? Oh no, we haven't. Yeah, okay. So just as okay, so I mentioned this before, but it wasn't in the text before. Great strength by way of the support. So this is in terms of having vows or not. Just as even a tiny lump of iron sinks. It seems to be the same metaphor, but used in a different way. Just as even a tiny lump of iron sinks, whereas a container made from it floats, so likewise the bad actions committed by unskillful people and skillful people are respectively heavy and light. Have I skipped something? No, I haven't. Strange. Anyway, let's keep going. It is said that for those who are skillful, who regret their previous bad actions, restrain themselves in the future, do not keep them secret, and apply their virtuous antidotes, they are light. As for those who arrogantly assume they are skillful and do not do this, but out of contempt deliberately engage in them, they are heavy. Anyway, so we talked about that before. The Heap of Jewels Sutra also declares that if all the sentient beings of billion universes were to have entered the Mahayana and gained the endowments, that should mean they're a bodhisattva. If you've entered the Mahayana, it means you're a bodhisattva. and gain the endowments of universal monarchs. And if each of them were to offer butter lamps in vessels the size of an ocean and with wicks the size of Mount Meru to a stupa of a Buddha, this would not match even 100th part of the merit of a bodhisattva who has left his home and who holds up a little bit of wick smeared with butter in front of a stupa. So this is okay. So anyway, this makes clear the strength of the support, even if there is no difference in the attitude and the field, and even if the thing offered is very different. So the point here is that you've got the bodhisattva who hasn't gone forth, left his home. Actually, Kimnichong, this must be talking about having received, the monastic ordination. So in other words, a bodhisattva who is a layperson versus a bodhisattva who is a monastic. So the bodhisattva who is a layperson could have offered this incredible offering to versus the bodhisattva who is a monastic offering a very small butter lamp. Their act of making the offering is far more powerful than the previous one. So this makes clear the strength of the support, even if there's no difference in the attitude of the field, and even if the thing offered is very different. There's no difference in the attitude, meaning they both have the bodhicitta attitude. There's no difference in the field, because who they're offering to is the same, the Buddha. And even if the thing offered is very different, so in other words, it's not the same. In the first case, huge offering. In the second case, very small offering. But because of having the vows, it becomes much more powerful. This reasoning also makes clear that depending on whether one has the support of vows, and if so, whether it is 1, 2, or 3 sets of vows. So in other words, you've got the pratimoksha vows, which includes the lay vows. With the lay vows also, you can have just, I think, the Nachik Naga. So you can take just one of the 5, although it should be one of the first 4. Or you can take 2 or 3 or 4 or all 5. Or, you can add on top of that the celibacy and so on. Depending on how many vows you have, it becomes more powerful. Everything you do becomes more powerful. Okay, so pratimoksha vows, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows. Those are the 3 sets of vows. The cultivation of the path will be the more effective the more one has. For example, there is a great difference in the strength of the roots of virtue according to whether a householder, at the time of giving donations and the like, acts on the basis of keeping vows, such as the one-day vows. So, there are one-day vows, which are part of the pratimoksha. So, like the householder vows, lay vows. Of course, much better if you take when you're doing the Mahayana precepts, then you also have the one-day vows, and it's much more powerful. So that's a fantastic thing to do for if you don't have the monastic vows, at least to do the Mahayana precepts, as we usually call it, Tijin Sojong Mahayana Prashada, like on the 8th, 15th, and 30th of the month, is not very difficult to do, and so everything you do that day. Of course, if you do bad things also become more powerful, but that's not too much to worry about. You just be careful that day and try to do then everything that you do on that day, that in terms of your meditation on bodhicitta, emptiness, renunciation, doing all of your sadhanas and so on, becomes much more powerful for that day. 8th, 15th, and 30th, those are the main ones. Then overcoming faulty ethical discipline, sutra says that compared to a human being possessing the 10 non-virtues, who for 100 years continuously and uninterruptedly accumulates bad actions, a fully ordained monk who has completely broken their vows, and who for one day dressed in the victory banner of sages, in other words, wearing the robes, enjoys that which has been offered in faith to him. So, the people don't know, they have faith in that person, they've broken all their vows, they're wearing the robes, they're given offerings and they use those offerings, maybe they eat or drink those offerings, their negative karma that they create. And so it says, they accumulate far more bad actions than than that first person. So one who's done all of the 10 non-virtues for 100 years, continuously uninterruptedly. Much worse for what that fully ordained monk does in one day. Again, because of the support, the bad actions have greater strength. The exegesis of the Vinaya, I think that's also a sutra, also says, and this is really quite serious also, it's better that they eat lumps of iron blazing with tongues of fire than for those with slack or corrupted discipline to eat the alms food from the local people. Okay, speaks for itself. This has been taught with regard to both corrupted discipline. I'm not, entirely sure what this is meant to be. So usually there's corrupted discipline, corrupted morality, so you've broken your vows. Not only that, but, you haven't restored them, haven't purified them. Then slackness in the training. I'm not really quite sure what that means. But anyway, it's to do with not keeping the vows properly. Dromdumba's statement that the sin of engaging in the 10 non-virtues is very small when compared to the sin of having broken one's reliance on the Dharma appears to be true. I have to look at that. I didn't notice that. Dumbe sune chöle tempe tipe kamna mikeva. Oh, this is actually, I'm going to have to look at that again, because this quote from Dromdumba, the disciple of Lama Atisha, is a little bit old Tibetan. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure. I have to look at that to make sure that the meaning is correct. Okay. Then great strength by way of the thing. So the thing that you're giving, or the thing that you're, well, anyway, we'll see. In the case of giving gifts to sentient beings, giving the Dharma is supreme. So anyway, in the case of giving to sentient beings, the gift of Dharma is far more powerful than giving material things. Giving the Dharma is supreme. And in the case of making offerings to the Buddha's, offering one's practice is supreme, each being far superior to gifts and offerings of material things. Okay, so there is. Use this as an example and understand it to apply in other cases. I'm not quite sure what that means either. I mean, it seems to be making a general point that best offering is offering one's practice. The best gift is a gift of Dharma. I'm not sure where else that would apply. Then great strength by way of the attitude, your attitude. The Heap of Jewels Sutra says that if all the sentient beings of the billion universes, out of aspiration for self-liberation, were each to create a Buddha stupa as massive as Mount Meru, and if they and all those who are objects of respect were to pay respect to them for 10 million eons, this would not match the merit generated by a Bodhisattva who, not separated from the mind aspiring for omniscience, does give me something? Yeah, that's all right. Offers one single flower. Okay, so I want to say something about this because it somehow, just looking at the English, it didn't quite make sense. if they and all those who are objects of respect were to pay respect to them for 10 million eons. So I think that what this means is that, you know, again, also comparing with the Tibetan and looking at some commentaries. So I think what it means here is, if they were to pay respect very elaborately, is one way of putting it. So it seems more, I don't really know how he got this out of the Tibetan, all those who are objects of respect. It really doesn't look like that. It looks more like somehow not just building the stupa, but really taking care of it in terms of maybe, you know, like not just perfunctorily, but really seriously making sure that it's kept clean, supplied with you know, offerings and so on. You see what I mean? It's more like that. It's more like that. So with that aspiration, they create a Buddha stupa as massive as Mount Meru, and then they take care of it properly for 10 million years. This would not match the merit generated by a bodhisattva who, not separated from the mind aspiring for omniscience, which must mean, you know, with bodhicitta, bodhisattva with bodhicitta, offers one single flower. Can you imagine? So, of course, you know, for a bodhisattva, it's like that. Okay, so we don't, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, you know, but, you know, even when we don't have bodhicitta, but, you know, like some kind of reflection of bodhicitta, where you know, you're not actually a bodhisattva, you don't have actual bodhicitta, but you're thinking, yes, I do want to achieve enlightenment. I think enlightenment is possible. I do want to achieve enlightenment. It's not just I think it's impossible, it's possible in general. I think it's actually possible for me to. So I really want to do that. Why? Not just so I can have a party, but, you know, for the sake of all sentient beings. I really think I can do that. And I really think that if I do that, I can really help others. And they really do need help. You know, that kind of, you have that kind of thought going on in your mind, you know? So then with that kind of determination, you think, so that's why I'm going to make this offering of a flower or a stick of incense or just one candle or whatever. Then it's just, you know, so powerful. And I wish I could remember the kind of thing that Lama Zopa used to teach, but it's like, basically, when you offer, even if it's a very simple offering, even if it's just, I mean, of course, you know, in a way, the mandala offering is the easiest thing, because when you do this with the fingers to make the mandala offering, Jaramshe says never, you should never do that with your hands empty. So like most people would pick up their mala, right, their rosary. Okay, so just suppose you're so poor, just suppose that you're so poor that you can't even afford a mandala. You could always, like, you know, put a pen in your hand so your hands are not empty, just so your hands are not empty, and you can offer the whole universe. And there's, you know, if you think a little bit about it, it's a very beautiful offering to make, really beautiful offering to make, mandala offering. With that motivation, you know, with the bodhicitta motivation, it's just so powerful. Then the result of that doesn't actually get used up until enlightenment. So it's going to keep bringing its results all the way up until enlightenment, because of that motivation and the fact that it's aimed at enlightenment. So really, it doesn't get used up until all sentient beings are enlightened. That's the way Lama Zopa used to explain it. I've heard him saying that many times. Yeah, it's very powerful. So, you know, if you're making an offering just so that you can become rich in this life, I mean, whether you would actually become rich in this life, I don't know. But anyway, once you got that, it would be over. The result's over. But when it's done with bodhicitta, then you know, it's not until the plan has been achieved, has become real, then the result keeps coming. The results keep coming. And in fact, also, I mean, actually, when you're offering to the Buddha, especially your guru in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha, then even if you don't have a bodhicitta motivation, it becomes a cause of enlightenment. There's that also. Okay, so let's, yes, just a little bit more to go through. Okay, offers one thing about likewise a difference in attitude, such as aspiring for a higher or lower goal, enlightenment, your own personal liberation, and so on, or focusing on just on one's own purpose or others' purpose, should be understood also in terms of greater or lesser intensity and longer or shorter duration. I didn't really think about that, great. So, not just thinking, anyways, you can imagine, you can have a very strong wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings, or one that's not so strong. You're probably going to find that that's got very much to do with the strength of the compassion. I also think, it's going to depend a lot on how convinced you are that it's possible, right? So that's the greater or lesser intensity, and then longer or shorter duration, like you were saying above. If you've been practicing this for a long time, then it's going to be more powerful. Yeah, anyway. When it comes to faulty conduct and intense afflicted attitude and long duration also have greater strength. So it works positive and negative side. Also, among the mental afflictions, anger is particularly strong. So there's a whole chapter about this in the Bodhisattva, right? It's a huge, big thing in the Mahayana teachings. So the entering the Bodhisattva way, the Bodhisattva says, whatever good conduct has been amassed over 1,000 eons by giving and worshipping, those gone to bliss, the Buddhas, in other words, and so on, is all destroyed by one moment of anger. That probably is right, but it doesn't actually say one moment. It just says one anger in the original. Here, anger towards those who perfectly observe their celibacy is very heavy. So I was wondering what that was in the Tibetan. It's a term that's quite familiar. Sambachaba. It's actually anger towards your companions in striving, or who are striving to become Buddha. So anyway, I don't need to go into that in detail, but that's what it means. Sambachaba, who are practicing similarly to you in towards enlightenment, your companions in the practice of striving for enlightenment, those who are like you, in other words, striving for enlightenment, is very heavy, and anger towards bodhisattvas is heavier still. Yeah, it doesn't really look much like it's to do with observing celibacy, although sangche can mean, celibacy, but this phrase sambachaba, it usually means those who are your companions, fellow practitioners towards enlightenment. The King of Concentration Sutra says, just to finish off, if someone harbors harmful intent for another, ethical conduct or studying cannot protect them, nor can meditative concentration or solitude, nor generosity or worshipping the Buddha. So it's a bit like saying, if you harbor ill will towards another, none of those things is going to help you. It's going to be very helpful. You might be doing all those other things, but because you harbor ill will towards others, it's not going to be very effective. Maybe it's not going to stop you from having to face the results of that the thoughts of ill will. So let's stop there then. Okay, so did anybody want to ask a question? So So we go ahead with the. I think that is interesting. More questions when we meet in the evening. In the morning, not so many questions. Anyway, it's okay. So can we do the dedications, please? It'll take a few minutes. May the precious supreme bodhicitta not yet born arise. May that risen not decline, but increase more and more. Due to all the past, present, and future merits collected by me, and all the merits of the 3 times collected by numberless Buddhas and numberless sentient beings, may bodhicitta be generated in the hearts of all the sentient beings of the 6 realms, and especially in the hearts of everybody in this world, including all the students, benefactors, and volunteers in the FPMT organization, especially Land of Medicine Buddha, who's hosting this class. May it be generated in the hearts of all those who rely upon me, all those for whom I have promised to pray, and all those whose names have been given to me. So that includes all the people on the prayer lists in at LMB, and also all the FPMT Dharma centers. May it be generated in my heart. Gosh. Sorry, somebody calling me from Aptos. And may it be generated in my heart and in the hearts of all my family members, those who are living and those who have died. May the bodhicitta that has already been generated. Oh, for goodness sake. Sorry. Oh, weird. Sorry about that. So strange. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. I fully dedicate all these virtues to be able to train just like the hero Manjushri, who knows reality, and just like Samanta Bhadra as well. I fully dedicate all my roots of virtue with the dedication praised as the best by all the gone beyond victorious ones of the 3 times in order to have good conduct. Due to this virtue, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all transmigratory beings without exception to that state. Due to all past, present, and future merits collected by me, the numberless Buddhas and numberless sentient beings, which are completely empty, existing from their own side, may I, who am completely empty, existing from my own side, achieve the state of full enlightenment, which is completely empty of existing from its own side, and lead all sentient beings who are completely empty of existing from their own side to that state which is completely empty of existing from its own side, by myself alone, who am completely empty of existing from my own side. As long as any sentient being has not been liberated from samsara, may I abide in samsara to help them, even though I have achieved highest enlightenment. By merely seeing, hearing, thinking about, or remembering me, as well as by touching me or talking to me, may all suffering instantly be pacified, and may there be happiness forever. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. I think that's it. So, see you next week. Bye. Have a nice rest of your day and rest of the week.